Policeman, defund thyself. Hi, this is Scott Ott with Stephen Green and Bill Whittle, and this episode of Right Angles brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And this show actually was birthed in the slightly bent mind of Bill Whittle, and I think it's a brilliant one. What if the police in cities across the country decided that they'd had enough of the cries to defund the police and decided that maybe they should take a couple of days off, what we used to call the blue flu when union negotiations were underway and the police wanted to demonstrate their opinion by suddenly coming down with something? What if they did it at this time? And Bill, it's your idea, and I'd love to get the genesis of that. What was it that inspired you to think this up? And do you think it's something that could actually work?
Well, it was a story on Instapundit about a young girl whose father was a policeman, one of these two policemen who were just essentially assassinated, just walked up to a door and just gunned down. And this is a early teenage girl, grieving for her father and trying to deal with the loss of her father in the line of duty, just trying to protect the population and getting gunned down in cold blood. And she had the temerity, the racism and the white supremacy to put Blue Lives Matter hashtag on it. And hell was rained down upon her, Scott. Sorry about your dad, but why did you have to include such a racist hashtag? And on and on and on and on and on.
Oh, so people did this knew that she was the daughter of the police officer who was killed and still rained down this abuse on her.
Yes, correct. Exactly. And when I heard that, I thought, why on earth would anybody with a heart be a policeman? Why? Why would anybody do this job? If it's bad enough that if you're a police officer, that you might end up orphaning your children and making your wife a widow every single day you go to work. But to think that if that happens, my daughter, my surviving child, will be bullied over it, not because I beat somebody up or arrested, but because I was shot in the line of duty. Who would do this job? And that's when I realized, I have such abiding respect for the police. Here in Los Angeles, things got a little dicey for a while. And several times we just walked down to a convenience store, my wife and I, and sometimes late at night, there's usually 3 or 4 policemen out there in the parking lot. And every time I see them, I just walk up to them and say, guys, I think you're doing a great job. And there's a lot of people who aren't protesting and, hang in there. And you can see this look come over their face, because when you start walking towards them, you can say, it's like, oh, here we go again. And it means so much to them to hear that. But I thought, why? Why would you do it? And here's the reason why I'm really half serious about this. In fact, I am serious about it. I think all the police in the country should just agree not to come to work for a week and pick the week and make it clear that we're not coming to work. And I'll tell you why. Because everybody was outraged by this George Floyd thing, and everybody should have known that this was a bad cop who had a history of excessive force and so on. But the problem, Scott, is, and the reason I think this is something that's probably going to have to happen, is that police behavior is measured against an ideal of perfection. Police behavior is measured against perfection. Anytime that a police officer oversteps his authority or uses more force than he should, it's measured against a world where police don't do that, where the police force behave, with perfectly. This isn't to say that I support or condone any of these lapses. I think just the opposite. But my point is simply this. I think if the police disappear, then people would have something to measure police abuse against. In other words, they would finally have a chance to figure out what the police force costs. What does it cost? We know what it costs. We know it costs occasional cases of extreme use of force and so on. But what do we get for it? And then you would be able to finally be able to say, now you know what a police force costs. Here's what it does, and here's what it costs. Would you rather have a police force that has a few flawed human beings in it, or would you rather live in a world where there are no police? Which one do you feel better in? And And I am so tired of everybody in this country measuring everything against perfection, against this idea of perfection. That's how amazing this society is that it can be compared to perfection. So I say, okay, you want to defund the police? Let's see. You should get your wish. I think the only way to cure people of socialism, Scotty, is to give it to them. And I think the only way to cure people of this idiotic belief that we should just get rid of the police is to get rid of the police. I think we should just give it to them.
Now, Stephen Green, this is an interesting idea as a thought experiment, but as a practical matter, in good times, this would be a tough thing to do because you might worry that the people most deleteriously affected would be those who are actually supportive of the police and who are victims of crime. But right now, Steve, when so many of our cities seem to be a tinderbox waiting for the match, do you think that there's any practical value to trying this now? Or if you didn't do it now, would the moment pass and it wouldn't be worth doing it at all?
You have to strike while the iron is hot, I believe. Let me tell you, we had an exciting incident happen here over the weekend. My wife and I were coming home from dinner the next town up in Castle Rock, meeting some friends. And as we got to our highway exit, there were a lot of police cars, highway patrol, sheriffs, Colorado Springs police, I believe. And there's a car up against the guardrail on the overpass. We had to drive by, and I mean, literally just police everywhere. And then as we're driving east to get to the little subdivision where we live, it's blocked off. There's police tape, and a crap load more police cars of various departments are all right there. And we ended up having to, thank goodness, there are two ways into our little subdivision. We had to kind of sneak around the back way to get past this police roadblock. Well, as it turns out, what had happened was there was a call from a little town north of here called Larkspur about some armed suspect. The name, none of this has been released yet, at least not when I checked this morning, just out of curiosity. Police were chasing him. He got off at our exit, I guess, ended up driving his car into the guardrail on the overpass, probably from, turning too quickly on that overpass, attempted to carjack another car. Again, there's, this high-speed chase going on here. That failed. So he runs up into our subdivision, breaks into a house. The couple, thank goodness, escaped before anything happened to them, opens fire at the police. The police open fire at him. No civilians dead, no police shot, and one dead bad guy. And this isn't like right on our street or anything, but if we had been home when this had happened instead of on the highway, I'm pretty sure we would have heard the gunfire. All I can say is, thank God there were police to respond to this thing. Only one guy died, and it was the bad guy. I'm okay with that. I'm really very okay with that. But the thing you have to remember is what is being proposed here, this idea of the police not showing up. It's already happening. It's happening in New York City. It's happening in Chicago. It's happening in Minneapolis. All of these places where the mayor has more or less disavowed the police department, the police aren't really doing their jobs anymore. I did a shot chaser item on Instapundit earlier today. The shot was, and this is a headline from, I think, the Minneapolis Star-Ledger. Number of Minneapolis police stops and searches plummet. Police aren't doing their jobs. And I don't mean that they're doing the wrong thing, but what I mean is when the city doesn't have your back, you don't have the city's back. That's just how that works. And the chaser was troubled South Minneapolis block, and you can imagine this isn't, in one of the nicer suburbs, renews calls for help from police and City Hall. And of course, they're not getting it. The police have been told that they're not welcome. What it reminds me of, police is like any other organization. If they've got bad management, you're going to get bad results. And management of a police department really comes from the elected officials at City Hall. I was working for a failing radio station. It was pretty obvious to everyone involved that even though our ratings were good, that the station was going down the tubes because we had no advertisers, because we had bad management that had scared off all of our local advertisers. And I was doing the morning show with another guy, Brian, and we got an attitude of, screw it. So instead of doing morning show material that was geared to a broad audience, we were just doing whatever material we thought was amusing. And you just see our ratings go down the tubes. But what the hell? The station was going down the tubes anyway. And that's what's happening in a lot of these big city police departments. There's bad management at the top saying, we don't want you to do your jobs. So guess what? They aren't.
Hey, Scotty, just real quick.
Yeah.
This original idea came to me when I remembered something that I hadn't thought about for 40 years. When I was probably about 13 years old in 1972, the 60s were still winding down and so on. I was driving with my father was driving. We were and up ahead of us. This was the time when everybody was calling the police the pigs. F the pigs, off the pigs. And there was a bumper sticker on the car in front of us, and the bumper sticker said, "If you're one of those people that think police are pigs, next time you get in trouble, call a hippie." And I remember my dad just loved it, and I loved it, and it never left me. And that's really what we're talking about here.
Well, and that's the problem with this otherwise brilliant idea. Is we think, especially if you don't live in an inner city, which I don't and never have, you think of inner cities as dangerous places filled with criminals. But in reality, they're dangerous places that only have a few drops of criminals. But a few drops is enough. You can really spoil the flavor of a nice beverage by a few drops of something like vinegar. And when you put that vinegar into this mix in the inner city, you create a situation that's not only toxic for the police, but is also toxic for the neighbors. And the neighbors are in an awkward position. These are the law-abiding people who just want to be left alone. They want their kid to be able to walk to school without getting knifed or shaken down. And they, of course, support the activity of the police, but the police are on patrol. The thugs are there forever. And so you've got to abide by whatever the dominant force is in the zone that you're in. And so if it means that you have to shut up and mind your own business and look the other way, well, then you do that for the safety of yourself and your family. And I know a lot of people who have lived in inner cities who would have privately expressed to me how supportive they were of what the police were trying to do and how they really liked the local officers that they knew. But it was a different matter when it came to, saying, hey, are you willing to stand up and say something about this? No, I'm not willing to stand up and say something about this. I have to live with these thugs next door. And if I say anything, I'm in jeopardy. I used to live next door to a police officer. He during the time I knew him, he got a new responsibility, and that was he was a mounted police officer then. And so he rode a horse, and he would ride around the downtown area of the little city where he functioned or where his jurisdiction was. I saw him quite a bit because he'd be out front, putting new brakes on his car. We'd come over to his house on holidays and come to the backyard for picnics. And he had a couple of daughters who were part of a little traditional dance troupe, very young girls and they had to have all these costumes and wigs and all this stuff. And he would travel around the country with his daughters, taking them to these events. He was also a photographer, and a rather gifted photographer, who would take beautiful pictures, not only of his daughters doing their dance stuff, of the horses, but even of his fellow officers in the police. And, in so many ways, he was such a broad-minded, well-rounded, kind, creative individual. But when you put a blue uniform on that guy and you put him in front of somebody who thinks the police are the threat, then all of a sudden he becomes monolithically just a show of force, and they don't see him for who he really is. Well, you've got to realize that every police officer goes home to a family or goes home and has a family somewhere in the country. These are real people. These are not symbols of whatever it is that you're angry about. These are human beings. And if you could start seeing them as human beings, they would be much more inclined to see you as a human being. And if we could start having conversations rather than shouting matches, like Bill said, when you walk up to a police officer and you go, oh, here he goes, because they're used to having people come up and shout at their badge. But they're not badges. They're men and women. They're humans. They have problems. They have families. They have challenges. They're just like you. You start treating them that way, you'll find that they're a force for good much more than you otherwise thought. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.